Welcome to the Kelly Patrick Show. Thank you so much for tuning in. In today's episode, I am joined by my friend Dalton. I know Dalton through the local combat sports scene.
Yeah, I trained at 10th Planet for a little bit, and then just took a little break, and then kept up with some of the friends in there, but that's how we met.
If you could put this a little closer, some people make a gay joke when I say that. Just a little closer to your mouth. No. But we've interacted on social media.
I like how you post what most people would consider outrageous stuff on Facebook.
So I do stir shit up, right?
I mean, I wouldn't even consider stirring stuff up. I just think so many people just are brainwashed. I don't even know if brainwash is the answer. They just don't care enough to look at detail.
But ultimately, what led to today's episode was, I think about a week ago, you posted something in one of my comments. Someone said, "Oh no, don't blame this on the Jews." And I looked at it and you posted a link. I felt kind of sensitive. Admittedly, I was kind of a pussy and I blocked you. And then I unblocked you. I thought about it and I was like, why did I do that? I don't want to be that. So I unblocked you. I added you back and then we started messaging.
I didn't even realize you blocked me. If I said something that is, anti-Semitic, I would hope so, because, to be Christian is to be anti-Semitic. The Jews, they sit here and they say, they'll never tell you you're wrong. They'll just say that's anti-Semitism or that's some other shaming tactic. To be Christian is to acknowledge Christ. Well, the Jews killed Christ, so I want to do everything that I can to spread, the knowledge that they are satanic.
Okay. Now, when you say the Jews, and before we started recording, you did ask me, you said, what do I think of the current state of Israel? Do they have the right to exist? So, of course, this all kind of plays into each other. But when you say the Jews, do you mean the state of Israel, the current incarnation of the state of Israel, really the government of Israel, the Zionist project, or are you talking about all Jews?
The only Jews that I would accept are the ones that acknowledge Christ as the Messiah.
So Messianic Jews.
Yep. Anything that's rabbi related, I would not.
What do you mean by you would accept?
As in being able to work with. If you, I'm called to make no peace with evil. And if you reject Christ, who has evil, you kill Christ, that's my job to stand up to you. And you see what they're doing, they'll strike you and then they'll cry victim. So they'll sit here and they shot at Iran first, and then you look at all the articles that's saying that Israel is the one getting attacked. Well, they just destroyed all of Gaza, and then nobody said anything.
And I would agree with a lot of that stuff, of course. So that's what brings me. Sorry, I'll take that pillow. I would agree with a lot of that stuff you would say, is that they're if you look at Dennis PragerU, and you do, and I've done this, you click on a video that says the history of how the state of Israel was created. Oh, of course. But in 1948, he says they announced the state of Israel, announced their declaration of independence, and then for no reason at all the countries around them attacked Israel. That's his version of it. So what you're saying, there's a lot of truth to it. I would attribute that more so to the Zionist project. I've been on a real good kick lately for this Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro guy. I interviewed him a couple times. He's an anti-Zionist rabbi. And so he would argue that there are good Jews, that the state of Israel, the specific current incarnation state of Israel, IDF, the Zionist project is really given a bad name to it. And that's what he would argue. And it's pretty convincing stuff to me. Because there's Christian Zionists too. And they're enabling some dangerous bad shit. I don't want to be associated with that either, do you?
I would say Christian Zionists are the fake Christians the Bible talks about. They're the ones that don't understand what's going on. Because, they say, well, Israel is God's chosen people. Well, they're not the same Jews. Because if you look at Revelation 3:9, it says, they'll be fake Jews. That's why you can't do DNA testing in Israel right now. They sit here and they allow, right now America's under Jewish fascism. How the hell is Benjamin Netanyahu controlling Trump? And he's over here shooting, he shot at Iran, and then here we are having to use our military forces and our foot soldiers to.
Oh, I agree. It's absolute, corruption and clear money laundering and land grab type shit going on. I think that the Greater Israel Project is slowly trying to expand and control a lot of the Middle East.
Well, yeah, but
I don't think that. You look at Jared Kushner's documentation of it all. It's very Yeah, it's very clear that they're that's what they're trying to do, to cushion a family.
Trump's dad was he was one of the most pro-Israel businessmen ever.
Trump's dad?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Didn't know.
And Trump, all he does is talk about in God's name. Well, he doesn't say what God. He kissed the wall. Anybody who kissed the wall, they're essentially.
Did you vote for Trump?
Not this time. I did not. I voted for him in 2016.
Me too. Me too. Same trajectory. Okay.
But if you sit here and you see in 2016, he ignited the first, semblance of patriotism that we had. And, everybody says Reagan was the last great president. Well, he let the fire for all this stuff. He gave amnesty, he gave no fault divorce. He had, all these things that are, they're not Christian, virtues. And you're sitting here as the right, supposed to be conservative. What are you conservative? You're now promoting liberalism, and you're now sitting here promoting equality and giving women the, scot-free card to leave whenever. And then, well, we gave them the right to leave. Well, we can't, men have no leg to stand on. They lose the kids, they lose the house, the laws have never been updated. Well, that's because of Reagan, and we want to sit here and glorify him.
So if you could go back in time, you would not have voted for Reagan?
If I could go back, given the candidates, the last president that I would vote for, the enthusiastic is JFK, and the Jews had him killed. So I wouldn't say America had a good president.
But if there's or let's say for example, Jeffrey Sachs, economist, Jewish guy. Now I don't think he's real religious. Kind of tries to stand for the truth. Ethnically Jewish. You don't think he's necessarily an evil person, do you?
I don't think that it's. I think there's two different.
Can you put this closer? Sorry.
I think there's two different kinds of Jews. I think there's the racial Jew, which is what you're noticed by their features, their bigger nose or their longer ears, and you can just identify them by race. And then you have the Christ-denying evil Jews, which are the ones that are in Israel right now.
So there are some maybe good Jews.
Race does matter. God created us differently. The last time that everybody came together and tried to be equal, but we tried to build the Tower of Babel. What did he do? He punished our tongues and said these ideas should never be spoken again. Well, now here we are in the end times. Everybody's the same. There's no such thing. Everybody's equal. Races don't matter. Races absolutely matter. Because he created Jew and Gentile separately. If races didn't matter, we all would have been the same. Look at Sodom and Gomorrah. They chose to be, heathens. Their race is extinct because they chose to not honor God.
You're making some references to Genesis. Did you grow up in a religious household?
Not really. I grew up, in a broken home, but essentially on government welfare. I walked myself to church. I wanted to play basketball, so I got to church. But, getting back into church just recently was because I just started getting really big into politics. And I was like, well, all this stuff seems like it's the end times. And Israel's, doing all this stuff. We're about to get dragged into World War III. And nobody's allowed to ever say that Hitler was a good guy. If anybody in modern history has ever played the role of Satan, it would be Hitler. You're not allowed to say his name at all. You can't even say he's a terrible person. You're not even allowed to bring his name up in.
I'll be interested to see if anything you say about Hitler on this episode gets my YouTube channel suspended. If that doesn't, I'm okay with it. I invited you on to talk about this. So what do you think of Hitler?
I think that he was probably the best leader since Jesus Christ.
Why do you say that?
I would say since Julius Caesar.
Why?
Well, he ended the Federal Reserve Bank that was in the Weimar Republic. So he squashed all the hyperinflation they were dealing with. He exiled. He didn't even kill them, so he just kicked them out. Everybody talked about the concentration camps at Auschwitz, and it's like they got it bad. They cleaned the Jews, and they had medical care. They had everything.
How many people do you think were killed in the Holocaust? How many Jews?
Not 6 million. I would just say most of them probably died from typhoid fever or just starvation.
Would you consider yourself a Holocaust denier?
I would outright deny it, 100%.
How long have you had those views?
Just recently, I would say, because if you control all the banks, and I initially started this journey being anti-Federal Reserve. Well, somebody's got to own it. Well, it's a private entity. Well, you look back and, in the Roman Empire, they killed Julius Caesar because he wanted to end usury. So the same Jews that own the central banks now are the same ones that killed him. Well, they killed Christ. So it's not hard to pick up the pattern. The same patterns that happened in the Roman Empire that caused it to fail are the same patterns today. Usury is not, and we have inflation now, but usury back then is just loaning money at extreme interest rates, like credit cards. And, if anybody's been in credit card debt, they know it's impossible to get out. Or even student loan debt, but student loan debt is probably worse because now it's backed by government and you can't default.
Do you have student loan debt?
No, I don't. I didn't go to college. But I think that, anything the government touches is poisonous. But
I would agree with that.
But if you look at all these, if you look at all these things that are coming out, you have to get government money to do anything now. And in America, we just passed, laws that you can't criticize Israel.
That's
You can get people just got deported for criticizing Israel, and then you turn around and Harvard, Trump's trying to stand up to Harvard and say, "Oh, you need to protect Jews." Why?
You're baiting me to bring us into another topic. You said people were deported for criticizing Israel. I think those people were actually here on student visas, and they were not technically citizens.
Do they not have the right to free speech?
Okay, so you're bringing me over into the immigration topic, which is, of course, something you and I discussed over chat.
100%.
Earlier.
I would deport everybody. I would deport every single person.
But what do you mean by that? Like,
Anybody-
when I get deported?
And anybody that is not a white Christian is out.
So we would have a country of 100% white Christians.
100% white ethno state.
Okay.
Why do white people not have a country to live? White people exclusively built this. This country was founded by white Anglo-Saxon Protestants. If you look at the first Immigration Act, there is no mention of anybody non-white.
Are you Protestant?
I'm non-denominational. I just believe that Jesus Christ is the Messiah.
But you do go to a church?
Yeah.
Non-denominational.
I mean, it's Pentecostal, but I bounce around.
So that would be like evangelical, and they would probably be more likely to agree with the end times type storyline and the Scofield Bible and the introduction of Zionism and those types of things, right?
Yeah, but I didn't pick this up from a pastor. I picked it up from my own research, and I just, noticed patterns. And if, one person, you can typically say most of the problems that have ever happened on earth are caused by the Jews. Everybody thinks that white people are terrible for the slave trade. Well, the Jews owned the slave trade. The Jews, they bought the Africans and then brought them over here. And then what do? They don't even get mentioned about all the atrocities they had, And then we have the Civil War, because Abraham Lincoln, wanted to suspend habeas corpus and keep the country together. Nationalism is the Confederacy. Nationalism is standing up for your homeland. They got invaded. The Union came into the Confederacy and said, well, this is what it's going to be. You're coming into my land. Any wealth that was, the Confederacy was accepted because now we're a union. You now have to work together. That's how a union is. We may have lost, but we're still a nation. That's how it was. Abraham Lincoln, the biggest battle he was fighting was the private bank. The Jews wanted to push for the private bank back then. Nothing changed. As far as I know, the Jews that we have today are, I don't know if this is all the way right, but around the year 1400 is what I've read lately, is that Judaism mixed with blood libel, which is what, most Jews are accused of doing in the tunnels underneath New York, where they say there have been confirmed cases where they circumcise the babies with their mouth. And it's like, why would you do that? Well, you sit here and they perform satanic rituals to, get in touch with Satan. That's the disconnect between old Judaism and Judaism, that we have now.
Our conversation earlier is, let me revisit that. So what kind of got us started on this today was something about immigration, I think, wasn't it? Does that sound right?
I think so.
So let me revisit what we were talking about here. You and I'm not going to read everything, read what we said on there, but so you kind of said, I'm sure you're more pro-free immigration, being that I am a libertarian. Admittedly, historically, libertarians are much more so open immigration. I would not describe myself as being an open borders libertarian. I said here I'm more on the Murray Rothbard stance on immigration. So if you're going to have a state, you probably need to have some type of border security type thing. I did say then that I do not approve of the way Trump has handled the deportations. And the reason I said that is my wife, of course, is from Cuba. She came here 10 years ago. And the way that they came, Venezuela, Cuba, they're escaping communism, and our country gives them
It's an
asylum status, okay? And so they know that when they come, all they have to do is get into say that they declare.
Does your wife speak English?
She does.
Okay, well that's
I'm not trying to make it personal about my wife.
I'm just saying, in order
she's assimilated.
Yes, assimilation.
She speaks fluent English. I agree with that. But the point I was getting to is she knows some people who came here under the Biden administration, under those same pretenses that she came here 10 years ago under. And then Trump got in office, and so these poor ass people escaped Cuba, where our sanctions have crippled the economy.
Yeah.
Okay, so our government has done that. These people come here, and they come here being told that they'll be able to seek asylum, but then Trump gets in, and Tom Homan, and they send an email saying, you need to self-deport. You're going to be deported. We told you when you came here, you sold everything, you're dirt poor. You get here, now sorry, we changed policy. You got to go back. I don't like stuff like that. That just doesn't seem like I don't think it's a net positive. I'm not even trying to sound like a hippie, like a goody, just like everything has to be perfect. But like,
why can't they flee somewhere else?
What do you mean?
Mexico exists, South America exists. Why do they have to come to America? Why is America the place that has to accept it?
And I'm not saying that it is. If we were setting it up going forward, Hans Hermann Hoppe, there's some more right-leaning libertarians who would say we should have pretty much closed borders. And I'm not going to say I would disagree with that. But to tell all these people, sell everything you have, like my wife, how she got here is at the black market, sell a bunch of shit there. Then she literally has nothing. Arrives here because we told them we take them. And then they get here and like, fuck you. That to me, that doesn't seem humane. It's not a good look. So I don't like authoritarian type stuff like that.
It sounds like a politician lied.
Yeah, politicians certainly lied.
Yeah, I mean, they lie about everything. That's why.
Who would be the one who lied there, though? Biden administration or Trump?
Both. I mean, the government with any power can't be trusted. That's why the founding fathers wanted everything at the smallest level. There should be no welfare state. If you eliminate the welfare state, half the people that want to come here, they're gone.
Agreed with that. And if we had no welfare state at all, especially for people who just got here, I say we have no welfare state. I know that sounds crazy.
I say we have no taxation at all. We have no any type of benefit or help is going to be done at a personal level.
But if we eliminated the welfare state, because these people who are coming over, even illegally, they're getting food stamps, welfare checks just for being here. And there's a lot of fraud with that. They then go back to other countries and they're still getting checks. It's insane.
How do you think that works? A lot of Jews in New York, they'll sit here and they'll marry their wife in the synagogue. Well, now they have a kid. Oh my God, my wife is a single mom. Well, let's get her on welfare. Well, the Jew bought the house or the property, and now the government's he's living there illegally because they're not supposed to be together. Well, the government, my tax dollars are paying for his family to pay off the mortgage.
Yeah, no, I think that's a whole different topic. Since we're trying to offend everyone with this interview, we might as well jump into the welfare problem in the United States and what type of adverse reactions or unintended consequences, as Thomas Sowell would say. What type of unintended consequences does a welfare state have on a community?
I mean, obviously, people are going to react to what's best. I mean, if the government comes out here and says, well, you can, benefit and get money this way, people are going to change their actions. Even people who could rightfully work, they're going to be like, well, work's not really that much. Like during COVID, they had an extra incentive for the extra unemployment. People weren't going back to work. Trump, the worst thing you could possibly do, shut down the economy, stop production, and print money. I mean, it doesn't take an economic genius to understand prices are going to go up, and the only reason that the dollar hasn't failed yet is because the whole world depends on it right now, and nobody wants to acknowledge that fiat's fiat. But back to the welfare state, America's welfare state has gotten so big that we fund the rest of the world. I mean, we sit here, we just ship, billions of dollars out to Ukraine to fight a proxy war with Russia because we're too scared to say, why does NATO even exist? Well, I mean, we're not at war with them. Why are we even giving money to Ukraine? And you saw Zelensky, under Biden, he just got a free, a blank checkbook with my tax dollars. They just printed them. They don't tax us anymore. If they're just going to print all this money, why do we even pay taxes?
I agree. I'm with you on that. I don't like our foreign policy at all. I think it's we have 850 military bases across the
So
world.
very offensive doesn't seem very defensive to me.
Yeah, it's not the Department of Defense. And 850 is actually kind of, I looked into it. If you count all the cold bases, like if you look at a map of Iran, there's like 26 of our military bases right around circling Iran. Now, they're not all active, but our military, yeah. But we don't know what the hell's going on. If they're getting ready to attack Iran, they could easily, they're still there. They're still surveilled bases. They're just called dead or cold bases, something like that. So, I mean, our military footprint across the world is insane.
I mean, this is what gets me is everybody, conservatives or, Republicans, they're supposed to be for small government. And I mean, that's just a lie. They're like, oh, I just want big government, but in my way. If you really believed in conservatism, you would slash government spending. You would, none of this stuff. The military should almost borderline not exist because we're not at war. It should be very minimal because we're not at war. We're here to protect ourselves. We're not here to, start wars with Iran and fucking back up, Netanyahu. He goes out here and says Israel has the right to defend itself. And it's like, you shot first. And then now Trump, because, Elon said he's on the Epstein list, and I believe anybody that's pro-Israel is on the Epstein list. I think that's the blackmail they had because, Epstein was Mossad, and his Ghislaine Maxwell, she was also Mossad. Her father wrote the textbooks that are published in school systems, and then Jews control, AIPAC controls everything. Thomas Massey just told everybody that. Well, if AIPAC controls the Board of Education and who and what content gets there, and then the Jews own the book company that prints it, I would say that you have outright control just because you get to literally pick what's in there. You can't even say anything about nationalism. You can't say anything about Hitler. You can't say anything. And, you're treated as an outcast from society. You can't, the rule is, who can't you criticize? Well, the Jews. Why is there such a small, why do they make up such a small population and they're in control of everything? They control Israel. I mean, the president of Mexico is Jewish, a Jewish woman. And then, what's his name? El Chapo, his wife had like 27 other candidates murdered so that she could get in power. Mm-hmm. And then here we are having Netanyahu, run America because Trump's a bitch. And, he's everything that he sold, he's a sellout. He just sold everybody out. And, he doesn't want to acknowledge it. And all these MAGA people, I used to be on the train. I used to love him. My first election was right after high school. I called Trump from a mile away. It was like Trump or Hillary. Trump had 1% back then.
Yeah, it was a wild experience.
But, he was the one person that stood up to all the fakeness, He looked at Ted Cruz and was like, Ted Cruz, you're ugly. And it's like, what? Like
your wife's ugly.
Yeah, your wife's ugly.
Your dad killed Kennedy.
Yeah, and then he turned around and said, Jeb Bush, he's joking.
Your brother lied us into wars.
And what did Trump do? Wow. It's almost like
it's just a cycle. And you know how George Bush Jr. got elected?
Oh,
on an anti-war message. So it's just a big anti-war. Barack Obama, anti-war message. It's all bullshit. That's why I'm not voting Republican or Democrat ever again.
But the thing is, at what point do we have the right to overthrow tyranny? Like, at what point? How many wars do we have to die? How many wars do we have to fight to, before we're considered, hey, we have a tyrannical force here?
Devil's advocate, someone would say, what wars are you talking about? We're not fighting any wars right now. That's what someone would say.
I mean, we just struck Iran, so that means that we are taking offensive.
What, do you want Iran to have nuclear weapons, Dalton?
I think that if Iran can make nuclear weapons, they are free to have nuclear weapons. Who is America to dictate? Why is America the global force? Okay. I believe, and I'm a free market guy. If you can source Iran, if you can source all the nuclear products, then go ahead. My stance is you are not a real country unless you can defend yourself militarily. And Israel does not have the right to exist. Wholesale does not have the right.
You asked me before we started recording, do I think it has the right to exist? And that's an interesting question. Because I would say, as things are, it's not ideal, but United States was founded on colonialism, right?
I mean, yeah.
A long time ago. I'm not suggesting we give all the land back to the Native Americans. Israel, of course, was founded on colonialism.
No, it wasn't. It was founded literally by politicians getting together and saying, well, this is the new Israel. It happened after World War II.
But that's what I mean by colonialism.
That's completely opposite. Because America's colonialism, they left the old world, and they
Okay,
took
yeah,
a boat, and they, if
That's true. Yeah.
I mean, they founded something.
So I said it wrong. You're right. And then we broke off from them. Now start independence from.
Yeah, but we started an entire new thought process. Independence.
All right. So imperialist England through the Balfour Declaration said in 1917 this land, the Ottoman Empire, it belongs to the people, the Jews is what they said. And then in 1948, they kicked 750,000 people out. The United States came on board and immediately was I think, the first country to come out in support of Israel. So I don't know what the correct verbiage would be, but they kicked a bunch of people out of their houses to build the current state of Israel.
The current state of Israel is just propped up by a proxy. I mean, it's just in my opinion, it's a Rothschild bank that props up everything.
Balfour and Rothschild is what came up with the Balfour Declaration in 1917.
They control England because, in World War I, whenever, can't think of whoever was murdered, but the stock market crashed, or whenever Napoleon lost, the stock market crashed. Well, the Rothschilds,
Ferdinand.
I think so, and the Rothschilds bought up all stocks. Well, they now own everything. I don't have to do anything. I just own the country now. I just own all the stocks, and you can't say anything. I think that the one example of standing up to tyranny in our lifetime is the Nazi Germany. I mean, they said.
So you view the Nazi regime as had positive intentions?
I think that Hitler was right when he said, "My spirit will be the start of World War III." When the universe realizes that what I was saying is true, we'll have a war. Well, if Jews are kicked out, if Jews are protected, and they're like, oh, they're the victims. Well, how many countries do you have to get kicked out of before you say, hey, maybe you're a problem? Who was it? It was Martin Luther has a 65,000 word rant about how awful the Jews are. And, he's got a book called The Jews and Their Lies. And it's like they refuse to assimilate. They sit here and they will not do anything. And then they're violent. They'll sit here and they'll go by any measure. They'll strike you and then they'll cry victim. They'll sit here and pass these onerous laws that are obviously pro-Israel. But the second you come out here and say, oh, you can't do that. What? You can't. You're never able to say anything to the Jew because they cry victim all the time. Well, they're obviously the starters of all this. Nazism is just a reactionary thing. It's not even a natural process in any type of environment unless your race is literally getting eliminated. If you look next to Germany, they have hyperinflation, so they're poor. They're essentially exiled from the world.
Crippled by the Treaty of Versailles.
I mean, now they have to pay all this money. There's a good old joke that said, a guy walks up to a store and he's got a wheelbarrow full of money in Germany, and he goes inside, and the people took the wheelbarrow and dumped the cash because the cash is, so worthless. And, it's like, well, how could that be? Americans don't understand hyperinflation. They're mad that the grocery prices go up. Well, when inflation really happens, we're going to wish we were the Weimar Republic. But the good thing is that Nazi Germany showed all you have to do is correct the problem and kick out the Jews, and then you'll be good because you can rebuild a currency. That's easy. Go back to the gold standard.
So do you think all Jewish people should be kicked out of the U.S.?
I think all Jewish people should be eliminated. I don't think they should have the right to exist unless they can defend themselves.
What do you mean by defend themselves?
And, I think Jews are traitors. I think they're treasonous. I think that unless they have the ability to actually defend themselves, I think that violence against them is outright. I think that you should treat them like the Roman Empire did and crush them.
You had said to me before that National Socialism is what you think is the solution. That's what you're describing.
That's what Nazism is. National socialism only happens when you're trying to protect your race. If you look at Nazi Germany, they have hyperinflation. They're getting all this degeneracy that we have in, America, the pro-trans, all this other lunatic stuff. And then they have, the Jews control all the media back then. And then, they cry victim when you exile them. Well, what did Hitler do? He made a new Deutschmark, and it was backed up by real goods. So, he seized the Rothschild's property. He was the only person ever to arrest a Rothschild. And then he abolished the central bank. And then he made basically a gold standard-ish Deutschmark. Well, nobody's ever done that. Who are you? Now he's vilified as the worst person ever. It's like all he did was care about his people. And if you look right next to Germany, you've got you got the Bolsheviks. What do they do? Why do you learn about Nazi Germany and the Holocaust when the Bolsheviks were Jews? They killed 60 million Christians just for being Christian. They destroyed 40,000 churches. You sit here and they're the ones really running the concentration camps, not Nazi Germany.
What about like Mussolini and other fascists?
I mean, Mussolini got overtalked by Hitler. I mean, Mussolini's not even strong enough to outtalk Hitler.
So do you think fascism as a whole sounds appealing, or do you think Hitler just was on something good?
I think Hitler was a natural reaction to the situation you're in. I think Nazism is the only ism that's not created by Jews, and it's what happens when you want to protect your race. So Germany, everybody says
only ism. Interesting. Libertarianism. You could argue the creators were maybe Jewish. There's a lot of Jewish libertarians actually.
Yeah.
Ism. So wait a second. You said Nazism is the only ism that's not created by Jews.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Okay.
Well, if you for forever you weren't able to translate any of Hitler's speeches. Well, AI translates all. And all of his things that he talked about are literally the same things that happen today. The cost of living going up, it's not a good thing. If you look at your citizens, well, there's no uniting factor anymore because what do? America is not a melting pot at all. America is a melting pot now because in 1908, a Jew named Israel Zangwill coined the idea from a play. Well, newsflash here, the Jew didn't come with the founding fathers. The Jews speak Yiddish. That's where the slur kike came from because they couldn't say they were supposed to circle what they are, and they couldn't say the word circle. So that's where the slur came from, is the language translation. They speak Yiddish. They wear funny hats. They dress funny.
Have you ever got to be around Jews much?
Yeah. I mean, one of my dudes that sold my last house that I flipped was a Jewish realtor.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, we're not cool now because, he seems to double down on I'm evil for liking Christ, but,
So you guys were connected on social media?
Not anymore.
But he commented on some of your stuff?
I just said something about when Israel had those crazy wildfires, floods, and tornadoes all at the same time. And I was like, oh, it's almost like Christ said, change your ways. And he sent me a hateful message. And I was like,
And then he blocked you.
Yeah. But, I'm not worried about a Jew. The Jews always they're going to refuse to assimilate. If you listen to them and, you actually hear what they say, that they think that everybody else is lesser than them. They think that they can rape and pillage the world. And, there's a special clause where pedophiles can get freedom from America and somehow seek,
I agree that is true with the state of Israel. I would argue, my only real disagreement would be the differentiation between Zionism and Judaism.
Well,
because as I said with Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro, it sounds to me like there are some, like I think 80% of actual Orthodox Jews, 80% are non-Zionists. And their idea of being a good person is sitting around reading books all day, studying the Torah. They don't talk, about the same types of things. Their idea of being the chosen people is not what the Zionists make it into. So I think the differentiation would be the Zionism versus Judaism.
I mean, the Zionism is more from the Talmud, and that's something, everybody wants to talk about, oh, look at Turning Point USA, they're doing so good. It's like, no, Charlie Kirk is wrong on the most important idea. It's like saying, man, I do such a good job. Look at all my clients. They're all losing weight, but the last meal I give them is poison. Oh, man, 100% success rate, Well, you come out here and the most important issue is he'll never criticize Israel. He will never criticize
Israel. Do you see that poll he made? He made a poll after we attacked Iran and said, do you think the United States should get involved with a war with Iran? And of his followers, like 90% said no.
But
so that shows that he does have a young audience. I think his audience is more critical of the Strait of Israel than he is, I think.
I mean, but look at him. He goes out here and, he debates, midwit college kids. They have no idea. They're just getting introduced to this stuff. They're worried about, being a college kid, getting drunk, getting high. They're like, oh my God, I'm in college. I'm doing the right thing. His beliefs are the reason that the next generation will never buy a house. Charlie Kirk sends up, he supports Israel. Well, Israel controls the central bank. Well, we print money to fund all these college loans. He's the reason that the next generation, through a long enough timeline, he's connected to it. But
Jerome Powell, the president of current
Fair shade.
is the first non-Jewish, but he is a Zionist. But he's the first non-Jewish chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell. But like I said, he is Zionist, so I guess that's all that matters.
It doesn't matter who's in charge because the money's going to print. You don't even have to. You used to have to make the coins. You used to have to. The Jews got kicked out of England in the year 1200 for coin flipping. That's why we have bridges on the quarters. We used to have coins that were made of metal, silver and gold. That's what gave them value. And then we came out with greenbacks, and now we have. We're like, oh yeah, we can sit here and paper's better. Well, it don't. Printing, paper through a printing press doesn't solve anything. It doesn't fix anything. You get stuff like the 2008 financial crisis, and you get way worse when you just print money.
What do you think of like Trump's tariffs?
I think if you're going to fund government, tariffs are the way to do it, or sales taxes.
I was going to say with your view of kind of having like closed borders, more of an ethno state, that seems more protectionist.
I think Trump's doing the work.
And I mentioned Pat Buchanan earlier. You liked him. He was more of a protectionist.
But yeah, you have to protect your own people because in a world where everything's exposed, look at the countries that are doing good. China wants to stay Chinese. Nobody says anything about that. You come out here, North Korea wants to stay Korean. Nobody says anything about that. Russia wants to stay Russian. By the way, Russia is vilified in the media because they don't have a central bank. Iran doesn't have a central bank. Syria didn't have a central bank. We had to kill
Bashar al-Assad. Or no, we didn't kill Bashar al-Assad.
No, Gaddafi.
Okay, Libya.
Yeah, Libya. And, he's the reason. He said it before he died. He said, if they kill me, Europe's going to be overrun by black people. And you look at this, Europe is a hellhole now. It's disgusting. It's not even recognizable, and this is a generation where it's like, you realize freedom's not free.
Gaddafi's used as an example recently of someone who agreed and cooperated with the United States and Israel, really, doing the getting rid of their nukes and all the enrichment programs. So he agreed with that. He went along with it. And then there was a revolt within his country and he got stabbed in the asshole on video by his own people. And that's how he died.
I don't think that it was his own people. I think that it was Mossad.
Okay.
Why does, Israel has the best, surveillance in the world. Somehow the information only goes one way. Why did the Jews get to keep it and America doesn't get it for them? If you look at, Google dancing Israelis, their dancing is the towers from 9/11 fall. You look at all this stuff. 9/11 was done by the Jews. If you look all the way back in history, the Titanic is unsinkable. Well, it sunk in the year 1912, and 3 of the biggest proponents to the central bank were on the Titanic. Just funny that it had to sink. What did we get in 1913? Central bank and taxation. And then you turn around and the Jews bombed Pearl Harbor, and then they blamed it on the Japanese. And every single attack that's ever happened against America is from the Jews. And they're supposed to be our greatest ally. What do we get? What does America get from even entertaining Israel? What benefit do we get?
A devil's advocate view on that would be they share a lot of intelligence with us.
What intelligence?
Yeah, I don't know. That's what I've heard though.
Once again,
why they're real good with technology.
Yeah, stealing ours and selling it to China. What good do we get out of this? We give them $3 billion up front in the beginning of the year as a loan. And Nick Fuentes was telling me about this. I think Nick Fuentes is the most sober person politically. He's been right about everything. And if people don't know who that is, you need to learn who he is. He's probably going to be the next president of the United States.
Really?
I think he is. I think the people who are in traditional media.
Do you think he's gay?
No, I don't think he is. I think that he just rejects hookup culture. I think that he just wholesale, the way he views things, that he's a Christian. He doesn't want to participate in degeneracy. If you look at what's happening now, you have so many kids out of wedlock, you have so many, STDs, you have life-changing things that are going on. Why would I participate in this? It's wholesale degeneracy. It makes a mockery of what, marriage is supposed to be. And marriage today is essentially a humiliation ritual. You marry a whore and it's supposed to be a white on your wedding day. It's supposed to be a virgin. Men don't get anything now.
Are you married?
No, I'm not. I'm single. And I don't plan on getting married until I find, somebody that's Christian. And that doesn't happen anymore. I don't even meet the standards that are required for marriage of our grandparents. Everybody says that's the standard. We want the old school though. Well, your grandma was a virgin and, your grandpa could provide on one income. Well, now women have been brainwashed by Jewish ideas and feminism to hate men and then come out here and, strive for whatever they want. And it's like the second they have a kid, they don't want to do anything.
There's an author, a Catholic author named E. Michael Jones, and he is known for criticizing Jewish people. And of course, for some reason, I'm drawn to interviewing people like this, even though I don't always agree with everything, I'm interested in hearing about it. And when I interviewed E. Michael Jones right at the beginning, I was just saying, hey, tell us about yourself. I wasn't going to bring up any of the Jewish stuff. Mm-hmm. Tell us about yourself. Well, I grew up in Philadelphia. I went to Catholic schools. I did this. And then he jumps right into, and then when I was in college, I realized the Jews are all supporting abortion.
I mean, if you look at it, I mean,
they're obsessed with abortion, I think is what I said.
Well, I mean, if you look at abortion, it's just child sacrifice to Moloch, which is, back in that time period, the cause was, oh, you'll have a better harvest. Well, what's now? You sit here and women are convinced to kill their own kids. And
yeah, I agree. The abortion thing is super fucked up. I don't know how much it's credited to the Jews. I don't know how accurate that is, but very fucked up how women celebrate killing their babies. I agree. And the older I get, the more I'm convinced if there's such thing as evil, that's it.
But think of this, because they've been so brainwashed that they will gladly shout that they've had X amount of abortions, but they're terrified to tell you how many people they've slept with. That's totally backwards. Mm-hmm. You sit here and, you can't hold women to any standards at all today because, it's not happening. They won't acknowledge it. Any idea of traditionalism is wholeheartedly rejected because it's viewed as, villainized. And everything that is, that made America great, it made America the empire that it was Christian values. Judeo-Christian values don't even exist. It's an oxymoron. Jews hate Christ. There's nothing Christian about Jews. It's a totally corrupted term. Jews did not found this country.
Judeo-Christian is a corrupted term?
Yeah, it's an oxymoron. Jews are Christian. How can you? It's like saying, I'm a social capitalist. I'm a socialist capitalist. What? No.
There are some people who say shit like that. They're socialist libertarians. I interviewed one once.
Well, there's you come out here and talk about immigrants.
They call themselves libertarian socialists. That's what it is.
Yeah, it's retarded.
Sounds pretty good.
You look at the things that have happened in America that are, from that movement, marriage is gone. You sit here in the natural order of the way the family structure was supposed to be, the way it worked for America. If you want to talk about conservatism, you have to conserve something, so there has to be a standard. It went God, man, woman, child. Okay, so we've replaced 1 and 2 with government, and we've given 3 the ability to kill number 4.
Yeah, and I agree that whole deal there sounds fucked up.
And then what?
Yeah, you credit that to government. I don't know.
Well, that's the welfare state we were talking about.
I don't know what the benefit of killing so many kids is. Margaret Sanger, creator of Planned Parenthood, she openly kind of celebrated killing black people, killing black babies, which is crazy. But I don't see what the allure is. Is someone making money on all these abortions? It's just, if there's such thing as straight evil in China, in these communist countries, they push it so much. Well, the absence of God. The older I get, the more convinced I am. Abortion is the epitome of evil.
There's two benefits that you get from it. Well, there's 3. You could, because Jews wholeheartedly, they denounce everything that's Christian. Okay, so they think that they're the chosen people and everybody below them is just goy, and goy means just subhuman. They'll deny it, but it's what it is. Okay. So what they do with abortion is Planned Parenthood, which was federally funded, they've been caught multiple times selling body parts and using their cells in all types of vaccines and stuff, selling them, making tons of money. And then on top of that, you now have mental prison for the women that have the abortion. Because think about this, and anybody that had an abortion, I don't think that you're a bad person. I think that Christ forgives everything, but I am against abortion because I think that's a life.
And I think celebrating is really fucking evil. And touching on the mental prison thing, Lila Rose is a Catholic. She's not real good on foreign policy always. I give her shit online. But anyways, about the topic of abortion, she debated 25 pro. She did one of those debates where it's one pro-life activist debating 25 pro-choice, people. And you could see physically, if you watch the video, you could see the women's faces when they say they had their abortion. And she's a sweet lady. She's like, oh, I'm sorry. How old would you be? And you could see they're like it's just like the saddest thing in the world. Every single one of them, as they are saying, and they're trying to convince you that it doesn't torment them now. But you can just see in their eyes that they're lying to themselves. It's the most visible thing ever.
Of course, because women naturally are supposed to They're supposed to trust authority. They're not supposed to be in leadership positions. They've been brainwashed too. They're supposed to, anybody who's, in today's world, they want to be a girl boss. They want to go out here and be an entrepreneur. We can't have the best of both worlds. If you're going to spend a lot of time in your career, your eggs are going to dry up. You can't be spending all these hours in work and have a family. It doesn't work that way. Dad can't be there for all the baseball practices. He's working. Dad, he has to make sacrifices too. And I highly doubt that any woman is going to sit there on her deathbed and be like, you know what? H&R Block really is what fulfilled my life. I'm sitting here with no kids. I have 7 cats, and I just feel fulfilled. Thank you. It's not going to happen. If you really want to see wholesale in real time, testament to this, give them dating apps. I mean, you sit here, all the girls that are 18 to 25, that they're in the prime. That is their window, that short window they have where they are in charge of the dating market. Okay, well, what happens? They go out here, celebrate hookup culture, they catch something. Oh, you're gone. Now your dating pool's stuck to whoever has it. And then turn around, you get knocked up by somebody who doesn't want to be around. So now you're a single mom. Yeah. Now you're on government assistance. You can't even chase a career now because you now have a kid, no dad. You're stuck to welfare. You can try to fight it. Good luck dating. Dating a single mom. It's not like you're number one on the marriage list. You don't even have most of them reject any type of femininity. So now I have to have a masculine woman and take care of a kid. That men aren't going to sign up for that. And they'll continue this. Well, you look at the bios and the girls that are 18 to 25, they're so happy, joyful. They're like, oh, I want to do this. When you look at the 30s, the girls that are around 30 start getting sad. I'm ready to settle down. Like hookup cultures ran their course. Now they're, exhausted from nobody settling down. They made bad decisions, and then they're like, oh, well, I need a real man to step up with all these problems they've had. And I'm not vilifying women. I'm just saying they've been lied to. And you look at these 40-year-olds, you're not supposed to be dating at 40. You're supposed to be raising your kids. You come out here as a woman at 40, if a guy's going to, commit to you, he's going to probably want a kid. I mean, IVF's expensive, and it's not even guaranteed. And if you want to see the absolute saddest words that man has ever created, read a single woman's bio on a dating app that's 50 or older. It's the saddest thing ever. And they have nobody to blame but themselves. They wanted the independence, and this is what happens. And unless men, say, hey, this is the standard, we tried to warn you, and hold them accountable instead of letting them off the hook, we gave them the right to vote. We didn't even have them, get drafted. That was the one thing to, with conscription was the right to vote. They don't even have to do that now. And, I don't think women should have the right to vote because I think that voting is beneath them. I think that women should not have to work at all.
Who should have the right to vote?
I would say the only people that have the right to vote are property owners or business owners or people who are wealthy enough to pay the poll tax.
And in a perfect world, it could be whites in my country.
No, I mean, I think there can be minorities, but I think that white people need a country. White people need a country. If everybody else can have a country, why can't white people? If you look, there's multiple calls by Jewish news to abolish whiteness. What is whiteness? White genocide is happening. So in the year 1900, we made up 33% of the population. We make up 7. And you look at what's happening in Europe, we're being flooded by Muslims. And you look at America, same thing's happening. Nobody wants to acknowledge it. California was beautiful when it was white. Look at all of our countries, or look at all our inner cities. 100 years ago, they were fantastic. I mean, they were the shining stars. Everybody wanted to go to them. The less white something gets, the more disgusting it gets. Rhodesia is a perfect example. You sat here, the British colony Rhodesia, which is now Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe is starving. They're on their 4th hyperinflated currency. If you look at South Africa, the white farmers are the only ones that produce anything, and the chants are kill the boy, and they're openly calling to kill them, and they're the only ones that produce anything. So, anywhere that whites are, we make it better. And I'm not saying that because I believe that we are superior to anybody. I'm just saying that's the way it has worked historically.
If we were to better our country, what type of political figure do you think would be good for our country? Could you compare? We need a modern version of someone.
JFK.
Okay, why?
Because he was anti-Israel, and he said he didn't believe that Israel should have nukes, and he was assassinated for it. He was very patriotic, but he was high charisma. He was masculine. He may have had character flaws. He's cheating on his wife, which I don't agree with. I think that you have a wife as beautiful as Jackie, you should never do that. Marilyn Monroe's a whore. fuck her. You have a wife. You sharing that intimacy with somebody is not what you're supposed to.
So you don't, if you learned that I was cheating on my wife, you would think less of me.
I mean, she's not white, so I'm just messing. I'm messing with you. I'm not a fan of cheating. I think that, hookup culture has really devalued exactly how intimate sex is. Sex is the closest you'll ever get to somebody's soul, and we want to act like it's normal.
Okay, that sounds like an admirable take.
And none of the
I agree with you on that.
None of the people in my generation have any idea of what real masculinity is in terms of what our grandparents were. I'm sure that you can look at your grandparents and say, damn, look at how masculine he was and compare it to the kids that are running here. I mean, Alex Jones gets called, crazy, whatever, but he's right. Look at our testosterone levels. You could put all these kids on Trent and their testosterone.
Trent is a steroid.
Yeah, it's the strongest steroid, one of the strongest. And you can put them all on Trent and they'd still barely be at the levels of what our grandparents were.
And the percentage of people who are taking TRT today is reflective of that.
I mean, you should,
and I'm not criticizing anyone for taking anything. At some point, I may end up taking TRT.
I think that you should. I think that it's the best thing to do, especially as a man. Your testosterone is what gives you life.
So if you can get, okay,
I mean,
that makes sense.
If you look,
I legitimately don't have a problem with anyone taking anything.
I just think that men are.
I just hope they do it in a healthy way, because sometimes I've known some people get into steroids and painkillers also, So sometimes I think maybe it can be an unhealthy lifestyle.
I don't think that anything. I think you should be able to legalize and sell anything in the country. I believe it.
You're libertarian on that.
Yeah, I'm a free market guy.
Even heroin?
Yeah, I think you should, because Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson are going to make a cleaner, safer, higher quality heroin.
Okay, that's a pretty good answer.
And then you have a chain of custody that it's followed, and any time you do it, you have a vape shop or a weed store, you just do it right there. You go in there, you go to the back room, you get your high, you have medical staff there in case anything happens, and then you're safe. And it stops it stops cartels, because now they have to find something else. So they're going to have to find some new thing to make money on. It abolishes gang culture. So now the neighborhoods are cleaned up because the jobs aren't there. It gives the users that are going to do it destigmatizes them, and then you're doing it in a safe environment because you literally have medical attention there. Well, the free market's going to naturally gravitate to where there's money to be made. Well, what happens with the profits? Now you have rehab centers that are opened up because the profits go in there. So all the people that are on the street that are just lefties, whoever, now they get charity, not charity, but it's the free market corrects the problem of the people kicked to the side of the road. Now they get rehab. Because
should prostitution be legal?
Absolutely, 100. And it's not
everything should be.
I'm thinking that not everything. I mean,
porn.
I mean, victimless crimes, should be legal. Like if there's no victim, it should be legal.
So what about porn?
I'm against porn, but I think it's a Jewish creation, and I'm not for it. But if you're gonna do it, you're gonna get a vice. If you're gonna stumble down that road.
If it involves human trafficking, illegal, evil shit on that end, you wouldn't be supportive.
No, obviously not. But if you look at now, prostitution is legal without selling, without actually doing it. OnlyFans is how women are.
I saw some stats about the number of women who are on OnlyFans right now.
But look at that. Look at what it is.
And I've known some guys who are like, hey, so and so girl, she has OnlyFans. I spent $800 on there. Oh, I feel like shit.
But look,
like, and then everybody's like looking at this girl is just completely naked. I guess I've never seen OnlyFans, and it advertised for this LFA event that I was at. It's a big business.
I mean, Jews own OnlyFans too, by the way. But you turn around and the girls are working in the brothel without actually doing the work of a brothel. They just get to sell the picture. Back in the day when it was happening, you actually had to fuck. You actually had to go out here and follow through. And the guys got what they wanted. They got laid. You come out here and the girls get to run it up.
And you think that was a better time when they had to actually have the sex?
Yeah, because guys got their fix. What's the one thing that guys, get in marriage for?
Now the guys masturbate and
you rob yourself of it. You sit here and you get the closest.
The good old days, back when there was more actual prostitution.
It's the oldest. It's always going to be there. Why soliciting a crime? It's a consensual thing. And if you open brothels, you make it safe because now you have mandated testing. You have people who have diseases. They're just going to work with people who have that disease so you don't spread it. So if you have anything, there's going to be people there. You're just work with them. You don't spread anything that's sold. Now all these girls that want to sit here and say, "Oh, you can't afford me," you got to put a price on it. You can't just string somebody along for forever. And all the guys that are in sexless marriages, they get nothing. They're still doing their duty as a man and a husband. They're going years without sex. Well, fine, I'm gonna go spend $40. I'm gonna go knock me one off. I'm gonna come back. Now the wife has to.
$40 for a prostitute?
I mean, I don't know what it is, but you go out there, the free market's gonna drive the price down.
Yeah. Okay. If it was legal, the price would be lower.
I mean, yeah, because the girls that want to do it happens now. The risk is if it's clean, and you're worried about getting.
I agree with that take on prostitution. I agree with your take on porn.
I'm not promoting it, but if
I think porn's bad for you, and I think that watching porn, even if you're single, I think it's bad for you. I do. I really do. I think that there should be something inside a man that's out trying to find a woman, find a woman, and I think that takes away from it. It just seems bad. And then you compound in the human trafficking and like the underage parts of it and all sorts of just horrible, like actually depressing shit.
I mean, the human trafficking come back to the Epstein list, and there's only one.
Kills you to say it, bud.
The Jews have a clause where you can flee pedophilia charges. I don't know. And you
mean the Jews, but that's the state of Israel.
Not even all Jews.
So Rabbi, in the defense of my buddy Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro, he would say that's an Israel thing, not a Jew thing.
Does he believe that at the age of 3 is the age of consent?
I need to get to where I ask him questions like that.
I sat here and I always laughed at people that were, they were out protesting on the side of the road, and they were like, "I want my foreskin back," and I never understood it. And it's like, well, you look at all these kids that the rabbis literally bit their foreskin off and had a blood ritual and gave them an STD for life. That's a Jewish thing. If you think about it.
Were you circumcised?
Yeah, and I'm just learning about it now. But if you think about it, that's an organ. It's your sexual organ made by God. If you acknowledge that Jesus is God, why would He make something that needs to be altered?
It's mentioned in Genesis, right?
Yeah, but that's the Old Testament. The New Testament is the new word. After Jesus died, that's what we're supposed to follow. Because that's essentially what separates the Jews from the Jews today. The Jews today are the Pharisees that Jesus, despised. The people that He overturned the tables of, the money changers, they're the Jews. The stereotypes, they start somewhere.
Just saying the Jews over and over again makes me laugh. Where you just keep bringing it up, but
it's everywhere. Once you notice it, you can't stop. And it's just pattern recognition. But I'm the bad guy if I say something.
For how many years have you been comfortable defending like Hitler?
I just always thought he was cool. Like
Has it gotten you into any trouble?
Not really. What is somebody going to do? Oh, you're a Nazi. I wouldn't even say I'm a Nazi. I just think that you should have the right to support your national race. I don't think that you should be moved out of your own homeland.
But National Socialism, so the parts that people really care about are the racist parts. So that's what they're judging for, their listeners and the viewers. Yeah. But my part is it's National Socialism. Why support socialism? That's a failed system.
Well, National Socialism is what you do to conserve your ethnic race because you have.
Why the socialism?
Because your resources have to be shared with one group. The free market lets other people like the Jews in.
So that does make sense.
So if the Jew comes in here, the Jew, if you look at communism was created by Karl Heinrich, and he's a Jew. He changed his name to Karl Marx, and he's, shocker here, he creates a system where government.
He was actually kind of anti-Semitic. He wrote some crazy stuff.
He's Jewish.
Yeah.
The Jews will sit here. You look at Twitter all the time. Like, as a white person, we need to atone for our problems, and then a couple of tweets later, I think that white people should be dead. And it's like, oh, I'm Jewish. Well, you shocker here, they act white, and then they turn around like, oh no, I'm Jewish.
What countries are your family from?
I don't know. I really have no idea where my lineage comes from.
You've never done Ancestry?
No, I just know.
Let me guess. Just go to Ancestry.com is owned by a
Jew.
Is it?
I know what 23andMe is.
Okay.
And I'm pretty sure.
So is that why you're not doing it?
They already have access to a lot of my stuff, but just however they got it, the government has.
You think you're Irish or Scottish or something?
I got blonde hair and blue eyes. Hopefully, I'm just God's favorite.
Do you think your blonde hair and blue eyes, kind of Aryan type look, has contributed to you kind of liking the Nazi type thing?
Not at all. In high school, I just always was like, dang, I've never seen somebody I didn't even understand German. And the way Hitler was speaking, I was like, dang, bro, he's speaking with authority. You don't
no, he's clearly was good at
but you don't see
reading
that.
the pulse of the country and then like really aggressively capitalizing on
But
that. Because they were a struggling country.
Look at all the political leaders we've had in our entire lifetime and people we can remember. Who has accurately picked the problem and in real time solved that problem and made their nation better? And then offered peace.
I think some people would argue that Trump has.
What is better?
Because Trump is really good at reading the pulse of everything and capitalizing. I think he's shape-shifting. I think he's kind of a piece of shit.
But
so I don't think he stands
Trump
he kind of did that.
First term Trump was good. You know, if all the, you know, people are like, well, why didn't you vote for Trump again? Well, the first time he was good. You know, Trump was right. And if all the never Trumpers are pro-Trump now, it doesn't mean that the never Trumpers got you know, good. It means that Trump got gay. You know?
Okay. Yeah. No, his initial message was kind of a Ron Paul type.
How can you have Trump we're so lost.
I fell for it in 2016.
We're so lost politically, and nobody knows what right or left is. Trump is a hardcore New York Democrat by any stretch of the imagination. He's a government spender. He's, you know, a union dude. He wants to sit here and say for the people, and he wants to write government checks. You know, he wants to be a big guy. You know, he wants to be a business guy and write stuff with my tax money. Well, that's not Republican. Republicans are supposed to be the frugal guys. Well, we're so lost politically that we consider Trump a Republican. Trump by any stretch.
And then also now we're considering RFK Jr. Republican.
RFK.
Yeah, and he brags about how his uncle Teddy Kennedy, his name was on more pieces of legislation that went into law. RFK, I've heard him brag about it. He's a very, very traditional progressive and always has been.
I mean, but you know, nobody knows what anything means anymore. Okay. I mean, it's you know, the terms are just they're spit out so loosely that there's no judge. Like people call Joe Rogan a right-wing extremist, and it's like Joe Rogan by any stretch of the imagination would be so far left. You know, he believes.
Did you hear him with Bernie Sanders the other day?
I didn't watch it.
I watched it. He sounded like he supported all Bernie's policies.
I mean, Bernie's retarded. I mean, Bernie sat here, you know, we need to tax the millionaires and billionaires. Well, the government made me a billionaire. We need to tax the billionaires, you know. But back to the Karl Marx thing. Karl Marx created a system where you take all the resources and all the labor of the entire country, everything, and you pull it together. And then you let a small select few, the government, hint, the Jews, disperse it, you know.
The dictator of the proletariat.
I mean, to each his ability, you know, as their need, or however he says, you know, communism, you know, we obviously found out it's, you know, kills everybody. You know, everybody starves together, and the ruling class just walks away with the money. Well, look what happens with Israel now. It's global communism. All their money goes to Israel. We fight the wars for them, and then we're all treated as the workers. Israel gets rich, and they come out here and
are they getting rich?
I mean, how are they not? They're every enemy that's on their border is destroyed, and all the people come to the white Christian countries.
But I heard my buddy Yaakov Shapiro was saying that Jews in Israel are killed in much more danger than Jews from any other country all across the world.
Well, I wonder why.
No, I get it, but is it really working? So I'm saying is that I don't think they're that safe. Actually,
if nationalism wasn't the correct approach, why does Israel want to defend itself? Why does Israel want a Jewish state? If nationalism was not the correct stance,
but that would be suggesting that Israel is doing the correct thing.
Well, that's what I'm saying. If Israel's saying that nationalism is bad, you can't ever glorify Nazi Germany. You're saying Hitler is evil. Nationalism is terrible. Okay. Why is Israel trying to do that with America's army? At least fucking Germany had their own army. They put their own soldiers there. The Jews are so evil that they use Americans' army and our money to fight their wars.
I was getting ready to say the only difference is and I was going to feel silly as I said it. I was going to say the difference is the Nazi ideology is a racist one. And then I thought, oh well, to be fair, Zionism is also racist.
I mean, but racism is just racism now is nobody thinks they can be racist against white people. Yeah, because they have this retarded, like, you can't punch down, and it's like, no, racism is racism, which I wholeheartedly reject civil rights laws. I think that all civil rights laws should be abolished.
What about like the laws that said black people can drink from the same water fountains as us?
I think that if somebody wants to open a water fountain and they want to let fucking purple people alone drink from it.
Okay, and that's a different argument. I'm talking about public ones.
Why do we have any public?
Okay. But do you think black Americans should have the same rights as white Americans?
Yeah, I mean, I think that anybody here. I think that you're.
But if someone owns a private business and they want to say no Mexicans in this business, they should be allowed.
Yeah, I mean, what's worse? Somebody
I agree with that.
What's worse? Somebody hiding their racism and having to serve you, and you have to trust that they're not going to poison your food, and or me saying, "Hey, fuck you," and saying, "Oh, you're this, and I don't want to do business with you."
I saw an African American coffee or donut shop that refused to serve police officers one time, and I was saying, yeah, they should be allowed to do that.
But why?
They should be certainly allowed to do that. In my opinion.
But the thing that I've never understood about people that aren't white or bash American history, why do you come here and not why don't you just go back home? Like, if you're obviously anybody who says they are hyphenated American, so they say, oh, I'm an African American. Well, obviously you haven't assimilated. Oh, I'm a Mexican American. You haven't assimilated. You are either an American or you're not. Because look at what happened in California. All these Mexican Americans, you don't seem pretty American to me. You seem pretty Mexican. You look almost treasonous to me. Now you're saying this is California. After we fought a war and purchased it.
Until the 60s, the African Americans didn't really have all the rights that we did.
I mean,
which was bullshit, you would say.
I mean, I think that anybody here should be treated. If you're here, you should get.
So you would disagree with forced slavery, the slave trade, and then.
But the Jews were responsible for the slave trade.
Okay.
The white people ended it. The white people globally ended it.
Okay.
And if we came out here, any argument for reparations or wrongdoing was paid for in blood, because 500,000 white Americans died fighting the Civil War, whether they were for or against it. That's enough bloodshed.
So you don't not really have a big beef with the African Americans, more so the Jews.
I mean, most black people. Black people are violent. They have a lot of crime problems. They refuse to address it. That's a problem, and they bled over into other places because you're not allowed to address other cultural problems without being racist. Well, everybody can collectivize. Well, why can the black people can vouch? They can vouch for African American issues. The Jews can vouch for anything anti-Semitic. The Mexicans can vouch for this. But everybody can collectivize except white people. If you say anything about, oh yeah, white pride,
there's something to that, yeah.
But it's a weapon, because the Jews are the ones that founded the EU, and the EU gave the authority to Israel to exist. Funny there. Well, the stated plan of the EU is to brown the white race. They want to turn Europe into a brown state. They still view white Christians as the Roman Empire that crushed them. And then they come out here, and for thousands of years, they sat here and, not had the chance. Well, now's their chance. This is the end times that Christ talks about. And
so ultimately, it's really kind of historically, the Jews have been in the wrong.
The Jews have always been wrong. They've never done anything good for the world, ever.
You don't think?
Never.
What about comedy, like funny movies that are directed by Jews?
I
bet there's some movies you think are funny as hell.
Seinfeld was all right.
Curb Your Enthusiasm? Have you ever watched Curb Your Enthusiasm?
I have not. I'm not a movie buff. I think.
No, it's a TV show. It was Larry David, the creator of Seinfeld.
Mm-hmm.
He, in 2000, he started this other show. It's basically Seinfeld, but it's about him. Tall, bald guy.
But think about that. That's the culture that we were rocked. Everybody was white. You can't watch a commercial now and see a white person. Everything is of minority. And you got to try to get the more minorities you can. You got to sit here and get a lesbian, handicapped, transgendered, Muslim on there. And it's that has to be the...
Have you ever considered running for office?
No, because I think that being in government is pointless. I don't want anything to do with government. I hate it. I despise it.
Do you think your defense of Nazis is popular?
Probably not, but I think that it needs to be, there needs to be an awareness that white people are being replaced. If you look at the vice president, J.D. Vance, he's sold as this, he's from Ohio. He's married to a fucking Indian. He's literally married to a G. They will be used by the Jews to replace all the white people. They will,
There's a lot.
There's a billion people, and they're all retarded. They literally make up, I think it's 50% of the waste that comes in that humans produce. They have plumbing in their country, and they still shit on the streets.
Do you think they're kind of like Jews?
No, I don't think. I think Jews are slimy. I think Jews are sneaky.
But Indians do own. I saw like in Uganda, they owned all the businesses in this African country, and then Idi Amin kicked them all out. So they were like the business owners, so kind of like a Jewish type angle to that.
No, I mean Indians get $200,000 more in federal assistance to open a gas station than a white person does.
Why?
Because everything's anti-white. There's anti-white stuff going on in America. Anti-white racism is happening. White replacement is real. White genocide is happening. If you look at our,
Do you like Tucker Carlson?
I mean, he's
Is there any popular media figure that you think gets it on these topics?
Anybody who says anything like this is banned immediately. You can't even
And
acknowledge.
Tucker Carlson has talked about the replacement theory type stuff.
I mean, but his dad worked for the CIA.
Okay. So,
Andrew Tate's dad worked for the CIA. You
okay.
come out here, anybody, it's just funny that all the people that are in positions of like, oh, look at this guy, he's cool. Well, they're all in positions or connected to government somehow. It's like the only person that's not connected to government is Nick Fuentes, and he's a younger generation and at least shares somewhat of
He's Mexican,
but he's white. He's
he doesn't look white.
It's not just that. It's the fact that you
He's
embrace
entirely assimilated.
Yeah, but it's the fact that you understand American culture and you don't villainize it. And it's
Okay.
he has a little rant. He's like, well, sorry that I'm not the the poster boy, the Aryan person who's going to stand up for white pride. He's like, I'm what you got. I'm what
He said some stuff that I've heard that makes some sense.
But
he's also said some stuff I definitely disagree with.
Do demographics matter? Let me ask you that.
What do you mean?
Do demographics matter?
Like in a country, depends on what matter means, I guess.
Okay, how much at what percentage of the population should white people be in a nation that they created?
Yeah, I don't know because we created it, but we created it in the same, I guess, colonial or whatever type way that I was describing with the Israel thing. So I don't think that it necessarily like we whites should have. I just don't. It just doesn't make as much sense.
So should we give Europe back to the Arabs? Should Europe just cease to exist?
No, I don't think.
So why does Europe has a right to exist but America doesn't?
I'm not saying we don't. The country doesn't have the right to exist.
America was.
I do believe in private property rights. So I think if you're going to have a civilized society, the most prosperous societies do respect private property rights. So I think that's important. But I don't think I don't know as much about the breakdown of that stuff.
Okay, so do you think that different races have different cultures?
Certainly.
Okay, so if race didn't matter, essentially this building right here, we could move 10,000 Muslims in and nothing would change.
No, I wouldn't say nothing would change.
Well, that's of course. The less white America has got, the more problems we had. If you look at America in the year 1900, everybody's like, oh, that's not that long ago. That's one lifetime ago.
Okay.
And people were like 100 years. That's nothing in terms of history. What we had at the time, we produced everything. We had no taxation. We had healthy population.
I agree with
we
that.
had the highest level of education. We had we had no central bank. We were the world's.
We had more of a sufficient, sustainable economic.
We had
system.
natural cohesion too.
It was more,
We had no welfare state. We had no taxation. We had everything was produced domestically. We came out here and
African American listening would say they didn't have the rights.
what rights? What did you not get?
In 1900.
What do you not get?
I know that there's some cases to be made that maybe their families were closer together before the 60s and stuff until after.
The welfare
but
state.
they didn't have all the rights that white people had back then. They did not.
The gratitude should be that they weren't shipped back to Africa after the Civil War. That
They'd probably already been here for a few years.
doesn't matter. They're property at that point. You sit here and you look at the South, and the Union just gets off scot-free. The South, the men are fighting the war. Well, what does the Union do right at the end of the Civil War? They burn the entire South down. Who's at home? The women and children. The men aren't at home. The men are out fighting the war. So all the wealth that was created at the end of the Civil War that is even close, not only did 500,000 white Americans die to free slaves, well, now everything back home is gone. And now you have to rebuild everything.
Yeah, no, I think that a critical analysis of the war, the Civil War,
And
is not popular, but I think it's appropriate. I don't think Abraham Lincoln was the hero.
I think Abraham Lincoln suspended habeas corpus and You know,
And that's a bad thing.
I mean, that's awful. I mean,
Right.
I just don't. How do you have? I struggle with this because I want to say that the nationalism of the Confederacy. Capitalism would have put slavery out of business. It would just capitalism naturally evolves. It just takes time to evolve.
Okay, I can see that.
Because people are like, well, what about lords and serfs? Well, I'm sorry that a fucking blacksmith had to forge a sword. It's not doesn't have the productive capacity that a machine does. But the labor is not what's productive. It's the machinery that makes the labor productive. Capitalism would have ended slavery because somebody would have came out with a John Deere tractor. Now you replace 1,000 slaves with one tractor. Same way we have equipment now that is 100 times better. Go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. I do need to wrap things up.
That's fine.
Would you like to promote like your Instagram or anything?
I'm good. I'm not a big social media
You're not
guy.
thinking that your views are necessarily going to like.
I mean, I would say, if anything, I would say just look at Nick Fuentes and just realize that, once the white person is gone, the entire country crumbles. Look at South Africa. South Africa it's just disgusting now. They're going to starve. They're going to sit here and, not have anything. Rhodesia, everybody hates it because it was a British colony. Well, at least they had electricity. Now Zimbabwe just passed a law to hunt elephants because they're starving. They're on their fourth hyperinflated currency. And, I think IQ matters. I think IQ is innate. And I think that's the biggest difference. And it's if you do believe in evolution, the only evolutionary factor is the fact that white people had to grow up and homogenize in colder, harsher environments. So we had to learn how to conserve stuff. And we got access to red meat. Red meat is the most important thing. That's why Jews always eat kosher. They will not compromise on their food. Well, red meat has fats, and the fats break down into cholesterol, which forms your brain. And that's why white people have on par higher IQs than the rest of the country. We're the only demographic to have the traits that are high in intelligence and high in creativity, and that's because we got access to red meat, and that fueled our brain function.
Rabbi Yaakov Shapiro would point out that Benjamin Netanyahu does not even eat kosher. So
good.
When you say the Jews, it's not in this case. It's not referring to Zionists.
Good. That means that we can nuke Israel.
Okay. Well, Dalton, thank you very much for coming on the show. I do appreciate it.
Absolutely.
I want to say thank you to everyone for tuning in. Of course, we will have another episode of the Kelly Patrick Show out soon. Thank you.
Can't wait to see what your podcast